I might be making the mistake of my lifetime to do this. And we were being offered like $10,000 a week, which was more money than I had ever heard of.
Soaring above his desert estate in 1988, Wayne Newton was ruling a $120 million empire. But 4 years later, the Los Angeles Times reported him standing in a bankruptcy courtroom, suffocating beneath $20 million of debt. Today, at 84 and battling a shattered spine, he's still dragging himself onto Vegas stages nightly. He traded his freedom for a microphone he can never drop. That 1988 Aladdin bet wasn't ambition. It was the first fatal crack. Let's check it out. The Aladdin gamble. 3 months. That's all it took for an $85 million dream to start collapsing under its own weight. And the man at the center of it, Wayne Newton, didn't walk in as a desperate investor trying to save a failing casino. He walked in as the most reliable paycheck on the Las Vegas Strip, pulling in $50,000 a night. A performer who had already mastered the one thing Vegas rewards more than anything else: consistency. And somewhere in that confidence, something shifted. The stage stopped being enough. Here's the thing about the early 1900s version of Las Vegas, especially heading into the 1980s, it wasn't just a place where entertainers performed. It was a place where entertainers started believing they could own the entire machine. Headliners looked at casinos the same way modern celebrities look at tech startups or sports franchises. If you're already the face bringing people in, why not own the building they walk into? That's exactly the mindset surrounding the Aladdin Hotel deal. In November 1983, according to reporting from the New York Times, Newton stepped into an agreement to purchase the Aladdin Hotel and Casino for around $85 million from the Dumani brothers, Edward and Fred, longtime operators trying to offload a struggling property. On paper, it looked like a bold but logical move. You take a fading casino, inject star power, rebrand it around one of the most recognizable performers in America, and suddenly, you're not just booking shows, you're controlling the entire revenue stream. But paper doesn't show pressure or how deals are actually structured. Because Newton didn't just buy a casino, he bought into a system of financing that was already fragile, layered with debt, and tied to entities that had their own complicated interests. According to archives from UPI at the time, there were already whispers about the types of financial networks surrounding Vegas deals in that era. And even when nothing was proven directly against him, the environment itself was volatile. That volatility mattered more than the headlines suggested. And get this, the Aladdin wasn't some rising star waiting to be polished. It was already struggling before Newton stepped in. So instead of acquiring a healthy asset and scaling it, he effectively walked into a business that needed immediate, aggressive turnaround just to stay alive. Think about that for a second. That gap between being the attraction and running the attraction is where things started to break. By February 1984, just a few months after the purchase, the New York Times reported that the Aladdin Hotel had already filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. 3 months. Not 3 years of gradual decline, not a slow burn that you can adjust and recover from, but a near immediate collapse into legal protection just to keep the doors open. And this is where the story stops looking like a bad investment and starts looking like a trap. Because Newton didn't structure himself as a distant investor. He personally guaranteed significant portions of the debt tied to the property. That decision right there is everything. It meant that when the business failed to generate enough cash to service its obligations, the pressure didn't stay at the corporate level. It moved directly onto him. It followed him. According to the Los Angeles Times coverage of his 1992 bankruptcy filing, Newton ended up listing roughly $19 million in liabilities against only about $3.5 million in assets. That gap didn't come out of nowhere. It traces directly back to obligations connected to the Aladdin deal. Obligations he had effectively signed his own name to. And once you understand that, the entire Casino King phase starts to look different. It wasn't expansion, it was exposure. There's a moment in every story like this where the outside world still sees success, while underneath, the numbers are already turning against you. Newton was still performing, still drawing crowds, still maintaining the image of a Vegas staple. But behind that, the financial structure tied to the Aladdin was bleeding. And debts don't just sit quietly. They accumulate interest, triggered liens which in turn invited scrutiny. That $341,000 IRS lien mentioned in Los Angeles Times reporting didn't appear overnight either. It was part of a broader pattern, the kind that builds when obligations stack faster than income can realistically cover them, even for someone earning at his level. Here's where it gets uncomfortable and also honest. None of this happened because he lacked talent. It happened because he stepped into a role that required an entirely different kind of expertise and treated it like an extension of his stage persona. Running a casino isn't just about drawing crowds. It's about managing debt cycles, regulatory environments, operational costs, and unpredictable revenue swings. And about knowing when to pull back, when to restructure, when to cut losses early. Especially ones who've spent years being rewarded for confidence and control don't always have the instinct to retreat. There's something almost ironic about it. The very traits that made Newton one of the most successful entertainers in Las Vegas, consistency, presence, the belief that you can hold a room and keep it, those same traits don't translate cleanly into high-risk financial decision-making. In business, especially at that scale, discipline often beats charisma. And the Aladdin demanded discipline. Instead, it got a performer trying to become a mogul in real time, inside one of the most complex and unforgiving industries in the country. You can feel the tension building even without seeing the balance sheets. Every night, he steps on stage. The applause is still there. The image still holds. But behind it, there's this growing weight of guarantees, obligations, and expectations tied to a deal that was supposed to elevate him beyond performing. Instead, it anchored him to something he couldn't easily walk away from. And this is where you start to ask yourself something a bit uncomfortable. If you're already at the top of your craft, already earning more than most people can even imagine, what pushes you to take on that level of risk? Is it ambition, or is it the illusion that success in one arena automatically translates to another? Because the Aladdin deal wasn't just a business move, it was a statement. It said he wasn't just part of Las Vegas, he intended to own a piece of it. But ownership comes with a different kind of pressure. When you're the headliner, you can walk away from a bad night and come back the next evening. When you're tied to the building itself, there is no clean exit. The losses don't reset. They accumulate. And by the time 1992 arrives, that accumulation becomes impossible to ignore. The filing, the numbers, the public exposure of just how far things had slipped. It all traces back to that moment in 1983, when the deal was signed. Remember that earlier idea about trading freedom for control? This is where it starts to make sense. Because once those personal guarantees were in place, the freedom he had as a performer, the ability to choose when and how he worked, started shrinking. Debt doesn't negotiate with your schedule, or care about legacy or reputation. It just needs to be serviced. And servicing it often means doing the one thing you know will always generate income, stepping back onto that stage, night after night, not just because you want to, but because you have to. He didn't buy a casino. He bought a responsibility that outlived the deal itself. And even as the Aladdin struggled and the legal protections came into play, something else was building quietly in the background. But what? The Pyrrhic victory of the Midnight Idol. The red light on the NBC camera wasn't just signaling a broadcast. It was lighting the fuse on a reputation that had taken decades to build. When Brian Ross looked into the lens in early 1981, he didn't just report the news. He linked the most famous face in Las Vegas to the dark underbelly of the mob. That single report, alleging a $500,000 wire to a known criminal, sparked a decade-long legal war that cost Wayne Newton more than his silence ever would. 1981 should have been the year Wayne solidified his kingdom after finally buying into the Aladdin Hotel, but instead, he found himself staring at a television screen as NBC News aired a segment called Crime Beat. The report was devastatingly specific, claiming that Wayne had reached out to a man named Guido Penosi to help handle problems surrounding his purchase of the casino. According to reports from United Press International in April 1981, the broadcast suggested Wayne wasn't just an entertainer anymore. He was a man who moved $500,000 to a figure the federal government identified as a member of the Gambino crime family. Think about the timing of that for a second, because it is absolutely brutal. Wayne was already drowning in the debt he'd taken on to secure the Aladdin, and suddenly, the federal government and the public were looking at him like he was a character out of a Scorsese movie. He didn't just take it lying down, though. He filed a libel suit almost immediately, claiming the report was entirely false and that his relationship with Penosi was nothing more than a friendship dating back to his childhood. But here is the thing about the legal system. It doesn't care how fast you want to clear your name. That lawsuit dragged on for 5 grueling years, during which every headline about Wayne Newton wasn't about his sold-out shows or his soaring vocals. It was about mob ties and secret wires. By the time they actually got to a courtroom in 1986, the financial hole he'd started in had become a massive chasm. According to the Los Angeles Times in December 1986, the trial became a circus of testimony regarding who knew whom and which phone calls were actually made. Wayne was fighting for his life, and for a brief moment, it looked like he actually won. The jury ended up awarding him $19.2 million, which at the time was one of the largest libel judgments in history. You'd think that would be the end of the story, a massive check to pay off the Aladdin debts, and a clean slate for the Midnight Idol. The jury foreman even called NBC's reporting irresponsible, which felt like the ultimate vindication. But wait, it gets weirder and much more depressing. While Wayne was celebrating that $19 million win in the press, he wasn't actually holding a cent of that money. NBC appealed the decision immediately, and the legal battle transitioned from a loud public trial to a quiet, soul-crushing war of attrition in the higher courts. While the lawyers argued over the finer points of actual malice and the First Amendment, the interest on Wayne's debts was compounding at a terrifying rate. He was spending millions on legal fees to protect a judgment that he might never see. And get this, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals eventually stepped in and threw the whole thing out. They ruled that there wasn't enough evidence to prove NBC had lied with actual malice, which effectively turned that $19 million victory into $0 overnight. Actually, it was worse than zero. According to legal analysts covering the settlement years later, Wayne eventually settled for a fraction of the original award, and most of that reportedly went straight into the pockets of the lawyers who had spent a decade fighting the case. He defended his name in court, but surrendered his fortune to the people in expensive suits. It is precisely this kind of compounding crisis that people often miss when they look at celebrity downfalls. It wasn't just that he lost money on a bad business deal at the Aladdin, it was that he was forced to spend his remaining cash fighting a ghost. Every hour he spent in a deposition was an hour he wasn't on stage earning the money he needed to keep the creditors at bay. The stigma of the mob-tied label clung to him like a shadow, even after the court cases were settled. It made banks nervous and investors run for the hills just when he needed them most. Imagine the mental toll of performing 2 shows a night, flashing that famous grin for the tourists, and then walking off stage to take a phone call about a $19 million judgment, vanishing into thin air. He was a man living in 2 different worlds, the glittering fantasy of the Las Vegas Strip and the cold, hard reality of a bankruptcy lawyer's office. The irony is almost too thick to believe. He fought to prove he wasn't a criminal, and in doing so, he became a man who owed money to everyone. But let's look at the bigger picture for a moment. Does suing a massive network ever really pay off for the individual? In Wayne's case, it was a Pyrrhic victory of the highest order. He got the moral high ground for a few months, but the financial wreckage stayed with him for decades. By the time the 1990s rolled around, the man who was once the highest-paid entertainer in the world was filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, citing debts of over $20 million. The legal fees from the NBC fight were a massive chunk of that weight even after the bankruptcy filings and the loss of his beloved estate, Casa de Shenandoah. The public still associated him with those old 1980s headlines. Once that bell is rung, you can't unring it, no matter how many times a jury says you're right. He was trapped in a cycle of performing to pay off the past, a treadmill that never seemed to stop. You have to wonder, if he had just ignored the report and kept his head down, would he have been able to save his empire? Or was the damage already done the moment that red light went on in the NBC studio? The $19.2 million became a ghost that haunted his balance sheet, a reminder of what could have been if the legal system worked the way we see it in the movies. Instead, he was left with the mob-tied stigma and a pile of legal bills that made his Aladdin debts look like pocket change. It was a reputational war that he technically won on paper, but lost in the only place that mattered: his bank account. This wasn't just a financial collapse, it was the slow, painful dismantling of a legend's pride. Every time he stepped onto a stage for the next 30 years, he was carrying the weight of 1981 with him. And while he spent decades trying to fix his finances and his name, time was doing something even more permanent to the man himself. NBC scarred his reputation in the 1980s, but as we move into the modern era, we see that the years eventually broke his body in ways that no lawyer could ever fix. It reveals the man beneath the myth, standing on a stage that has grown much smaller than the one he once owned. The eternal residency of the Midnight Idol. Wayne Newton spent 65 years in residency at the Flamingo, but by 2021, it looked like the show was finally over when a serious spinal injury sidelined him. You'd think that would be the signal to finally hang up the sequins. But here is the thing about a man who has been rebuilding since a $20 million bankruptcy in 1992. He literally cannot afford to stop. According to updates on his official website, WayneNewton.org, he's currently back on stage for his up-close and personal shows, which are intimate, stripped-back performances that feel more like a living room chat than a grand spectacle. He sits for much of the set now, a visible concession to a body that has given everything to the neon lights. while Coming Soon reported in 2025 that his net worth sits at around $50 million. That number is incredibly deceptive when you look at the overhead. Think about that for a second. $50 million sounds like total security, but for Wayne, it's a high-stakes balancing act required to maintain a lifestyle that includes a $20 million ranch and a private plane, as listed by Tuco in 2025. Most people his age are decades into retirement, but for a man born on April 3, 1942, the stage at 84 isn't just about the passion of the performance. It is the direct descendant of those Aladdin hotel debts he spent a lifetime trying to outrun, proving that the grind never truly ends. It's almost as if $50 million is the price of admission to keep the past from catching up with him. A golden cage that looks like a fortune from the outside. You have to wonder if rebuilding from a total financial collapse is a true victory, or if it is just a way to delay an inevitable defeat that was set in motion years ago. The grind built a massive fortune, but the real question lingers. What does Vegas actually owe its last true king? Wayne Newton's journey from the heights of the Aladdin to the grit of the courtroom proves that in Vegas, the house always finds a way to collect. His $50 million fortune is less of a trophy and more of a life sentence to the stage. What do you think? Is he a conqueror or a cautionary tale? Let me know in the comments below.